I would ask you to consider how you would feel like, I mean, defending yourself against a person. You think of somebody, there's some malicious psychopath who's broken into your house and is now wanting to harm you and your family because that's what he likes to do, right? That's like the quintessential circumstance where you'd feel fear, you'd feel a lot of things, but you'd probably also feel hatred for this person, right? There are few circumstances where hatred feels more apropos than that, but I do view hatred as always being somehow extra, even in extremis like that. Because imagine just how you would feel. Very superficially similar situation. You have an attacker in your house and you have to defend yourself violently, but that attacker now is not a person; it's a wild animal. A grizzly bear has broken into your house, or a mountain lion, right? It's still an absolute emergency, right? You're still going to have to fight for your life. You're still looking for a weapon to defend yourself with, right? You're still contemplating killing a living being to defend yourself, right, and your kids. But there's an emotional shading there. Like, as energized as you would be, in the presence of a mountain lion or in the presence of a grizzly bear, there's this layer of, the layer of hatred doesn't quite fit.
Because you feel they have less choice.
Yes, of course a mountain lion is going to be a mountain lion. It's like a mountain lion can't be other than a mountain lion. On some level, a malicious psychopath can't be other than a malicious psychopath, right? So I think we do have to view people on some level as equivalent to forces of nature, right? We don't get angry at hurricanes, and we certainly don't hate hurricanes in the same way that we could hate another human being. But if we could lock hurricanes in prison, we would, right? I mean, they're immensely destructive. We're still trying to figure out what to do about them. But it never we never take this extra step of actually hating them. And I do think we could have, ethically speaking and psychologically speaking, we can have a similar relationship to even the worst human beings, while doing all the things we need to do to defend ourselves against them. We can put people in prison. We can. I'm not in favor of the death penalty for actually these reasons, but because I don't think anyone creates themselves. I don't think anyone is truly at bottom responsible for being who they are. I mean, if you had the same genes and the same life experience of whoever, Jeffrey Dahmer, you'd be Jeffrey Dahmer, right? It's like there's no mystery there. But so I think at bottom, when you're looking at these just very stark differences in life outcomes, you're looking at differences in luck, right? I mean, there's biological luck, there's circumstantial luck, there's all kinds of luck, and there's what we do with the luck, but your capacity to do good things with even your bad luck is yet more good luck, right? I mean, there's some genetic and environmental reason why you were set up to pick yourself up by your bootstraps when somebody else in a similar situation wasn't, right? And so on some level we have an ethical imperative to acknowledge the massive role that luck plays in our lives, and I think we should want to cancel the most egregious differences in good and bad luck between people. Like, so when we look at a whole society that is suffering from immense bad luck because it didn't have the natural resources that some other society did, or it had those resources, but even those resources created perverse incentives, and so it's got a terrible political outcome based on all the level of corruption that's layered on top of the resources. I mean, there's just terrible disparities in luck there, right? And so I think we, as a global civilization, more and more, as we grow wealthier and wealthier, and can take advantage of good luck over here, we should want to engineer a tide that raises upon which most or all boats rise more and more. It's not to say that capitalism is wrong. It's not to say that we're ever going to completely nullify differences in luck. And I think some asymmetries may, in fact, be the optimal way to encourage people's creativity and innovation, right? So it's like I'm agnostic as to on some of the questions of how to organize a society and an economy there. But I do think more and more we need to recognize that so many of us, I mean, certainly anyone who has got the free time to listen to this conversation right now, stands a pretty good chance of being in the top 10% or even 1% of humanity with respect to luck. You know, all the variables, whether it's with respect to health and wealth and education and just having the free time and attention to listen to this and be interested in this and to be asking the kinds of questions we're trying to address in a conversation like this. We're immensely lucky, and with that comes a certain responsibility, but also opportunity to spread the luck around.
Yeah, to create luck for others.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I loved where we were going with that and loved where we went, but going back to the outrage piece, the understanding of, you know, almost differentiating our hate from outrage, almost extracting some piece of the ego from it being petty and individualistic, but that it's for a greater cause. Then how do you go forward with that? Like, what do you do with that thought, that idea, that feeling? So you feel pain when someone else is in pain, you feel stress, you feel outrage, as you said. There may be a petty personal anger to it that triggered us in the first place, but we were able to carve that out and understand that that wasn't the basis of our real outrage, that there was something bigger.
Yeah, well, then it really just depends on what the problem is and what the situation is, and whether you can influence it, right? I mean, if you can't do anything about it, well, then it's not useful to be just grinding your gears with outrage. I mean, your outrage needs some kind of outlet, you know, so if you have some kind of platform upon which to try to make sense on these important topics, well, then do that. But yeah, it's never useful to just be privately seething with outrage that has no outlet, right? So you have to figure out, one, what pragmatically can you do to accomplish anything useful on the basis of this emotion? And if there's nothing to do, it's great to have the tools by which you can just let go of it, right? And it's like, and that's and again, that's where meditation comes in. I mean, that really is a kind of superpower. You can just decide, okay, there's nothing to do here with this negative emotion. So now I can just let go of it, and that's it's true for public-facing emotion like outrage, but it's true for an inwardly facing one like just anxiety about something that is coming up in the future, right? So like you've got some medical condition, now you need to get an MRI to see if you've got something scary, and you can't get the MRI until next Tuesday, right? So now you've got this time to wait. So the question is, in the intervening days, how captured are you going to be by this feeling of anxiety? Is there any utility in feeling anxious between now and Tuesday? And if there's not, wouldn't it be great to actually just let go of it, right? And most people feel like that's pretty hard to do, right? I mean, most people don't have tools apart from just diverting themselves, distracting themselves with something else to take their mind off the thing that they're really sort of thinking about in the background, that they don't want to think about, but they're helplessly, you know, perseverating on it. But as far as acting in the world so as to make the world a better place, I think, you know, based on outrage or some other emotion, you know, I'm impressed more and more by how much that's a story of changing incentives at the system level more than it is a story of getting individuals to improve themselves. I think individuals should want to improve themselves, and I want to improve myself. Insofar as I can share wisdom about how to do that, I do that more or less full time. But there's another level of analysis and another level of discussion that needs to be applied to the systems in which we're all functioning, and we need to recognize that in so many places we have systems of incentives that are aligned so as to make it actually hard to be a good person, right? Like you need to be some kind of moral hero to be truly ethical, given how the system is tuned. And conversely, totally normal people can be lured into behaving more and more like psychopaths in a badly tuned system where the incentives are all wrong, right? And I think more and more we need to be alert to that, and we need to want to design systems where it just becomes easier and easier for ordinary conflicted, mediocre people who are not even thinking about ethics all that much, right? Don't want to. They just want what they want. It's easier for them to behave more and more like saints because the incentives are aligned to that way. To take a example that's recently top of mind, so like we have the problem of climate change. Well-intentioned people want to do something about it. We don't want to create the most profligate harms for ourselves unnecessarily, right? So it'd be great to have a system of incentives and economic opportunities and technologies that just made it easier and easier to be wise with respect to our carbon footprint. And there are a lot of great ideas in this space, and one of them is let's buy electric cars, right? Let's transition from a fossil fuel economy of transportation to an electric one. Well, that sounds wonderful, and I've had an electric car, and I just had to get a new car, and I was poised to buy another electric car. But then I hear on Joe Rogan's podcast from this guy who's just published a book. It's coming out. Forgive me, I've forgotten his name. I think it's Sriram Krishnan. I could have that wrong. But he has a book coming out called Cobalt Red. But he had just did a 2-hour podcast with Rogan, which was just this litany of horrors that attend the extraction of cobalt from Congo, right? It's like 72% of the world's cobalt is in Congo. We use cobalt in all of our batteries. Basically, our supply chain for cobalt is on top of just slave labor and child labor and just, kids getting buried alive. I mean, it was just as bad as you could imagine. And so here we have a system where we all want to buy the next electric car because this is the good thing this was the virtuous thing to do, but now we find out that the batteries are soaked in blood. There's no good option, right? And now we have to pretend that we didn't hear that podcast, or the people designing the batteries are pretending they don't know where the cobalt comes from. And there's we need to figure out. I mean, this itself, it should be a simple problem to solve. I mean, it's probably a few percentage points of profit margin that would make the extraction of cobalt an ethically defensible practice, right? And there's probably some cobalt-free technology that we could design in the future. But it's just to get these things right really matters. And if you don't get them right, you've got people who are deeply conflicted about what they're doing, or just not completely unaware of what they're doing, and creating these massive negative externalities that they might not even know about. I literally was 24 hours from buying another EV, right? So it's not that my loan purchase or not of a single car is going to matter that much in the scheme of things, but it's like I would have, had I not heard this particular episode of Joe's podcast, I would have bought that EV thinking I was doing an unimpeachably virtuous thing, right? And now I have a much more conflicted decision to make around, what's the right car to drive in light of my climate change concerns. This is just to say that the individual can't solve the cobalt supply chain problem, right? So we need these solutions to come at the system level and at the institution level, and that's where being a good person is sort of beyond the scope of anyone's individual choices. We need to collectively solve a massive coordination problem together, where in the act of gratifying our desires, we are creating less and less harm and doing more and more good, more or less effortlessly. And that really is. You can have people who are just not thinking about purifying anything, behaving in really impeccable ways, given good incentives, and that's so more and more I'm thinking about that.
Yeah, I love that you're thinking about that, and I think it's an idea to put forward, though, is that it's also that the people that are setting up the institutions and the systems are also individuals. So it's like a vicious cycle. It's like the leaders at the top, the people who have made all these decisions to go out and, take all this cobalt and make sure that it was picked by child slaves or child labor or whatever it may be. I haven't listened to the podcast, so I don't have the context. But someone made that decision, and some system never thought to correct that because that was led by some people. So I think, I agree with you, but I think it's both. It's like, I think even where systems have been made tight, you still see people trying to find a loophole. I mean, that's how the human mind is set up. And so you've got the loophole mindset of like, okay, well, let me find a way to exploit this or manipulate this towards my benefit anyway.
Right.
And so you've got both. I think both are important. I think, like, if you were the decision maker, if you were building EVs, you would be able to make that system in your company and you'd set it up, but that would come back to you.
Yeah.
Right?
But it could, like, if we taxed carbon instead of taxing income, say. I don't know how that works out in terms of the balance sheet, but something like that. So we're using a tax to disincentivize something we want to disincentivize, pollution, and we're not penalizing something that's intrinsically good, just creating value and being paid for that value, which is what income in the best case is coming from. So there's that, and then like all of a sudden people would, all right, if it's costing me money to be polluting, well then I'm going to figure out how to not do that, and that's just going to be our interests are going to be aligned there, right? So, and so there's probably 100 or 1,000 cases like that. But where I was going was I've been thinking a lot about what has come to be called the effective altruism movement, which is just how to do good more reliably, more systematically. Many of us have been disillusioned with how philanthropy has been done traditionally. It's like there's a distinction between, this actually comes back to some of what we've been talking about with the difference between being led by one's emotions and actually understanding what the outcomes are in the world that one is accomplishing. When you're trying to do good in the world, when let's say you're giving to a children's hospital, say, that just seems an intrinsically good thing to do. But we know that so much of our impulse to do good, our impulse toward altruism, our impulse toward effective compassion is driven by the single compelling story, the single identifiable protagonist, the one little girl who's got cancer and we can help her, right? And that we sort of go to sleep when we're told statistics, right? So like we perversely we care more about the one little girl than we care about the tens of thousands of little girls just like her, maybe even the tens of thousands of little girls including her, right? It's like you can run psychological experiments where you show people one little girl and you ask them how much they're inclined to help and how much money they'd give. They give the maximum amount, under those conditions. If you show them the same little girl and you layer on a story of just how many other girls there are like her, people's compassionate impulse reliably diminishes, right? So this is clearly a moral bug of our operating system. So we know that the good feels we get from giving are separable from the actual effects of our giving in the world. So anyway, I've thought more about this, and I've brought on various moral philosophers to speak about this but both on the app and on my podcast. And one change I made in response to one of these conversations was I just decided that Waking Up as a company would give a minimum of 10% of its profits to the most effective charities each year, and I personally would give a minimum of 10% of my pre-tax income to charity each year. Now I was already giving money away to charity, and that felt good. But once I decided, all right, here's the formula, I have to give this minimum amount. This minimum amount is already allocated to these ends. And what's more, these ends have to be not just charities and causes that I feel really personally engaged by, or just things that I want to support, like I want to give money to a college or a symphony, or it's like something that I see somebody's GoFundMe page and it tugs at my heartstrings. I want to give money to that. No, that's all separate. Here's 10% that's going to charities that I, in the kind of sober, rational analysis, have decided are going to do the most good, irrespective of how I feel about these things. Because there are certain causes that I just don't find especially sexy, that just not like I just can't. I have to continually rethink my interest in them, but they are objectively, if you want to save a life, per unit, per dollar put into the system, this is the best use of your dollars, right? So one has been, malaria mitigation in sub-Saharan Africa, just malarial bed nets, right? Like I just can't get too excited about handing out bed nets, right? But that's something that's worth supporting. So I just decided that, okay, GiveWell.org has run this analysis. They're a great source of information about effective charities. Here are their top 10 charities. Whether I find these sexy or not, I know I can outsource the cognitive labor to these people because I've spoken to them enough. I've analyzed what they've done. They're doing enough. This is their full-time job. All right, until I hear otherwise, I'm going to take their advice. It doesn't matter how I feel about these charities. Right? I'm going to get my good feels elsewhere. But what's happened is once I decided that I'm going to give this amount of money to charity each year, and it's happening by default, whether I'm thinking about it or not, whether I'm gratified by it or not, a very interesting thing flipped. One is when I confront all these other opportunities to give money away that are tugging on my heartstrings, they almost show up as a kind of guilty pleasure. Like I literally have had the feeling of giving money to a children's hospital or giving money to somebody's GoFundMe page, and it's almost leveraging the same greedy circuits in the brain as you'd get if you're like opening a catalog and you want everything on both pages. It's a very visceral experience of selfishness and selflessness totally merging, and it's like wise selfishness is the same thing as selflessness, but it has the energy of like I want to do this, and because I sort of know I've rationally allocated to this a certain amount to doing this good, kind of automatically, sort of even out of sight and out of mind. I'm not spending a lot of time thinking about where that money's going. It sort of changed my relationship to all these other occasions where I'm having to decide on the basis of my intuitions moment to moment whether I want to give and how much to give, and it's really just kind of flipped everything upside down in a way that's interesting. And again, it's all based on having made a sort of system level default change that is a sort of hidden structure in which I'm now moving. Right? Because again, I'm not, until you make a decision like that, you're constantly rethinking what you want to do. It's almost like going on a diet. Like if you decide, like I don't eat dairy anymore, right? So once you don't eat dairy anymore, I eat a lot of dairy, but if one didn't eat dairy anymore, it's just a bright line, and then you're not constantly rethinking whether you're going to have ice cream, and if so, how much, and so it's massively clarifying.
That's a great example. That really hit true. Yeah, the clarity of constraints, right? Having borders and boundaries and constraints are allowing you to not waste as much time and energy on figuring that out moment by moment.
Yeah.
I've got two more questions for you, Sam, that I want to make sure I ask you today. How does someone like you, as a meditator for so many years, as someone who's so thoughtful about these topics, as someone who wants to see change in the systems and institutions as well, how do you interact with the news? Because I find that to be such a source of anxiety and stress for so many people who are probably listening to us right now. And so I'd love to hear how you've built a healthier, hopefully systematic, logical relationship with the news.
Well, it changed recently for me because I deleted my Twitter account, which was where I was getting a lot of my news. I mean, I was not getting the news from Twitter per se, but I was following lots of smart people and seeing what articles they were recommending, and so I was going through that it was kind of like my news feed. So I still, I read the New York Times, I read the Atlantic. There's many things I read, so I see the news in various channels, but I was using Twitter as the first filter on that, and that, for a variety of reasons, became really toxic for me, and toxic in a way that I was convinced was misleading. I mean, that was the thing that got me to finally just kind of rip the Band-Aid off, because it wasn't just that I was seeing the worst of people and that was having a certain effect. I was convinced that I was seeing people at their worst who are actually not as bad as they were seeming to me on Twitter. Like what Twitter was calling out of them was just a misleading picture of who they actually are. Because in some cases, I knew the people in real life, and then I'm seeing them behave in abominable ways on Twitter, and I just think, all right, this is just a funhouse mirror that isn't psychologically healthy to keep staring into day after day after day. And also just so many of the things that it was amplifying stories that I was, as a podcaster, I was tempted to react to, and I felt like I was getting a misleading signal as to just how salient or representative those stories are of the way the world is, right? So like it was just the phenomenon of being too online ultimately, right? Yeah. So insofar as Twitter was news or a simulacrum of news, that has really changed for me. I just am not seeing it, and now I just I have a few sources of news that I go to as more or less reflexively, but again it's more and more I'm asking the question, what do I want my moment-to-moment life to be like? And who do I want to be at the end of the day when I'm hanging out with my wife and kids, right? And what are the consequences of having spent my attentional budget over the previous hours in one way versus another? And I mean, Twitter, for me, honestly, was a big change, because it was like getting out of an unhealthy relationship. I mean, I was just, for all my talk about meditation and being able to unhook from anger and other states, I mean, I could unhook and I could let go of negative emotion, and et cetera. I mean, it's not that the tools don't work, but I was spending a lot of time looking into this very deranging space, and it's not deranging for everybody, but for me, because what's unique about my job or my approach to my job is that, I criticize the right and left politically, a lot, and with sort of equal ferocity, and so I'm not tribally aligned with anyone, and I get a lot of pain from both sides, and it's a lot of it's not honest pain. It's not like honest criticism of views I actually hold. It's like lots of lying about views that I don't hold, and it's just misrepresentations, and people take clips out of context, and I mean people cut together clips of my podcast where I'm seeming to say the opposite of what I in fact said in context, and they release those, and people with big platforms retweet them. So it was a pervasive experience for me of seeing myself lied about, and then wondering whether there's anything I should do about that, right? And so it was this very sticky invitation to getting sucked in, because okay, that's not what I said, that's not what I meant. Now I'm seeing the evidence of lots of people being misled by this misrepresentation, and it bothers me, and I'm pretty sure it should bother me, because this is not the outcome I want, right? And this is not why I have a podcast, and it's not why I went on that other person's podcast, and so there's some burden on me to try to clarify the misunderstanding, and I was continually getting sucked into the illusion that clarification was possible. Right? So I would try, because I really wanted to use Twitter as a channel of communication. It was the only social media platform I ever used. I never used Facebook, I have Facebook and Instagram accounts, but those are just marketing, channels for my team. I'm never on those. So I was on Twitter. It really was me, and I was, as much as I could step away from it because it seemed unhealthy for a time, I kept seeing the evidence of confusion and misrepresentation. I thought, I'm just going to try again to clarify things, right? And that was such an unrewarding experience that it was creating a residue of despair and contempt. I mean, I just felt polluted by. I just felt like I had met all the psychopaths in the world on a daily basis. There can't be as many psychopaths in the world as I seemed to be meeting online. As much as I could step away from it and just and put it down, I kept picking it up again. And so I just thought, this is crazy. So I just ripped it off. And that's been an immense change. I mean, sometimes you need to actually do the thing that is, you can't just keep putting yourself in this dysfunctional situation and then processing your reaction. It's like you have to ask yourself, why are you doing this? Why are you spending your time and attention this way in the first place?
Yeah.
And so for me, it was Twitter. I mean, I understand other people, depending on what they could just be if they're sharing cat videos on Twitter, they're just getting nothing but love, right? And they have no idea what I'm talking about. But trust me, it's possible to have a truly lousy experience on Twitter.
Yeah. What, if anything, would bring you back? Because I love what you're saying there, that, if you're doing the same thing, it's giving you the same result. You've tried a new thing with it, it's giving you the same result. Sometimes you have to cut it off to create a healthier balance, to reconfigure, to do the work you want to do. What, if anything, would allow you to go back to it? Or how would you see yourself if you were to go back to it in a healthier way? I'm thinking of all the people who cut things out their lives because they need to feel that distance from it, because it's taken a hold of them. But then they know that in reality they might have to go back at one point.
Yeah, well, I'm not planning to go back. I don't really see that. I don't think. I mean, for marketing, I don't need it.
You don't miss it.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah. Well, I miss it. I miss the good parts of it.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, because I was following a lot of smart, funny people, and that was entertaining. But the truth is, even the good parts were ultimately diverting in a way that, in retrospect, feels like a bit of just a waste of time. It's just like I'm getting. I didn't have to spend as much time even with the good parts of it. It was kind of like, just like too many carbs in that part of my information diet. That's what Twitter was. It was all carbs. I mean, if I went back, I would I would probably use it much more like I use or don't even use my other social media channels.
Yeah.
I would just use it as I would have someone post for me, or I would post without ever looking at what's coming back at me. And there are people who get a lot of negative stuff coming back at them, and they just never see it because they just never look. And that's I could have been one of those people, and I was that sort of person for some periods of time. But I just kept getting lured by the by the promise of clarifying confusion. Because here the person just says something to me, and I can say something back. Why not? And strangely, none of the other social media platforms have ever hooked me in that way. I've never been tempted to get on Facebook or Instagram and use it in that way. And I'm not looking for a substitute for Twitter. I mean, so that is interesting. There's many people are recommending substitutes where they're building their new platform. They got off Twitter for whatever reason. But it's not.